Welcome back everybody, and today we're going to be looking at my first attempts to construct a Warhammer 40k model. We're going to start with the Necrons, and inside the recruit manual there's some instructions there on how to assemble the 10 Necron Warriors that come in the box. And we can see on the sprue that there's 5 parts that we need to construct the first character. And there appears to be a body section, a free arm, an arm with the weapon, a head, and the chest piece. And so what we'll be doing is extracting these guys from the sprue, and looking at the sprue there seems to be a taper the way they're connected to the body, and to be careful, I find that it's a lot easier to put the flat section adjacent to the actual part but not put hard against the plastic, because it tends to actually tear a chunk of the plastic out of the body, and unfortunately you can't sand that down once you've got a pit. So I tend to, in most instances, leave a little bit of space between the actual part, leaving a bit of a tab that can be cut off. Not so crucial on the foot peg at the bottom. Clearly you're not going to see that, but we can see there's a little bit left on the bottom of the foot and on the side of the back there, and also the leg. And the easiest way to remove that is with a hobby knife, and just carefully just slice that away without amputating your arm. Generally I find that the knife is relatively sharp, but if you do it in a controlled manner you tend to be quite fine. Certainly it's easier to control in a slow motion, dragging the knife towards yourself, than pushing it away. And we can see here on the side it's just a nice progressive push through the plastic, and sometimes it takes a few attempts to shave it down to the necessary shape, but persistence pays clearly, and we'll just work that away and then grind off the remainder of it. Now, looking actually at the instructions, what we do find is that there are several options on each model. You have the choice of 2 different weapons. They give you both the Gauss Flayer or the Gauss Reaper. They recommend using the Gauss Flayer in the recruit book. That is the single-barreled weapon rather than the double-barreled weapon as an option, but clearly you can use both. And the heads, there's just 2 different types of, I guess, damage that you can see. Some have impacts and holes and misaligned jaws, so you can pick and choose which one you want to put that on. And getting back to the model here, we're just shaving off some of the bits and pieces that are left there, and also taking off some of the mold lines on the body. Now the second part there is the arm. You can see there's 3 connection points. One is at the end, and another one is where the arm goes into the socket. So we can cut that off flush because you're never going to see that. And I typically tend to cut off the smaller pieces first, leaving the larger bit last, so that we don't have any accidental damage as we remove the big piece, which generally takes a little bit more force to remove from the sprue. And yes, it does take a few rotations of the sprue to get the right orientation before you're ready to cut it off. Typically you can see that there's a wedge shape, and I find that if the wedge tapers off towards you, you've got a better chance of controlling the cut. So once we've extracted the arm, we can see there's a little bit left on the elbow, and one on the socket point, and the other section that goes into the actual weapon. And we've just cleaned those off so that at least they're nice and unjaggy, ready to actually go on assembly in the model. We're going to use the Gauss Flayer, not the actual Gauss Reaper. So we'll extract that out, and we can see that there's quite a fine section there on the front of the blade component. So just very carefully snip that out. There's 2 other pieces along the top of the barrel, again cutting those with the flat edge next to the barrel, but leaving just a small piece projecting so that we can cut that off progressively with the knife, rather than have the plastic deform and go white and potentially end up with a hole in the top of the piece, which unfortunately then we're stuck with. So the last section there is cutting off the socket, so to speak, that goes into the body, and we'll just trim that off, and we just need to clean those pieces, and then we're almost ready to get assembling. So that's all cleaned off now. Just scrape that off, and any potential mold lines there might be, which you can see in part across the top of the gun there, and that'll be ready to go in. We're just going to take a quick look at the heads. You can see there's quite a few there, and looking at the back of them, I noticed that the size of the actual piece that projects into the receptacle, it varies in size, and so all the heads are not interchangeable, I found out. So just removing the head from the sprue, leave a little bit on the bottom of the chin there just to protect the chin, and then carefully just shave that away again to make sure that we don't damage the remainder of the cranium, and then we should be pretty much right. Fortunately, it's only one piece there. It's not actually on the round section, it's on the flat, so it's a lot easier to clean up. Just being very precise and using a bit of magnification, because they're very small fiddly pieces. Definitely not looking forward to painting them, because that's going to be an entertaining exercise. But that was the skull we chose. That's 3B, but we're not actually using that, but we will be taking out the actual rib cage, which is section or part 5 next to it. So carefully cut the two very small pieces on the section that takes the head, and then there are two on the bottom of the rib cage, and just again approaching those from the tapered side so that we can cut them off, leaving a small section, and then we can again clean that up, and then we'll be ready to place everything together. Now, leading into that, there's one thing that I did notice as I was going through all this, and that is obviously this is the starter set, and the starter set comes with push together, no glue required models, and they have a little rod or a shaft that is meant to socket in to the adjoining piece to hold them together. And unfortunately what I found was they tended to be a little bit too thick or too long and obstructed the actual piece coming together, leaving the join lines gaping. So I found it was necessary to actually shave a piece off of that so that it was shorter, and then you would get a better fit of the model. I'm imagining in other kits that aren't the starter sets, you won't have to worry about that, you'll just glue it together. The arm just fits in to the gun, and there is a flat edge on part of the piece that sockets in, and we just align that up, and that changes the orientation of the weapon in his arm. All the Necrons appear to be right-handed, they're all carrying the gun in their right, and then all we need to do to start assembly is push the left arm into the socket, which will effectively hold the gun and both arms in place, and then we just realign the top shoulder joint there. There is a bit of a sort of a little ball that projects out that sockets in, and then we can place the rib cage on and give that a bit of a push, and you can see that there is a joint on either side, and if you don't cut the central spore down, what you're going to find is that's not going to join together. You're going to end up with a bit of a gap there, which doesn't look particularly attractive. So shaving it down was the most sensible thing to do. Now with the head, you just push the shaft into that back section of the skull, and you can orientate the head because it's just effectively rotates, so you can get a bit more dynamic with the shape of his face. Once we have the head on, that is it. Our Necron Warrior is now complete, and what we can do is put him on his base. So we just push in the foot, which has a hexagonal sort of spline on it that goes into the opening, and he is then secure. So that is one complete Necron that is freestanding. And over the course of several hours, we were able to piece together the full unit of 10, each with Gauss flayers, and we just randomly chose whichever of the two heads were optioned to give them a bit of variety. You can see they're all right-handed, as I said. They vary in terms of how they're standing. And one thing just to finish off, which you can't see in the models there, obviously, is to drill out the barrels. That appears to be something that is necessary to do. So with the Necrons, I found that it was practical to start with a fine drill size, which in this instance was 0.6 of a millimeter. So we start a pilot hole, trying to center it as best as possible and having to restart if required, just to make sure we have it close to the center line of the barrel. And we just drill through there nice and slowly, just to start the hole and get it to a reasonable depth so that it looks like it's continuous. And that might take a few attempts just to keep going back and checking to make sure you don't overdo it. And once you're happy with the depth of the penetration, then what I went to was a 0.8 millimeter. So 0.6 to start, and then 0.8 to enlarge based on the size of the barrels on these particular weapons. So we bring the larger one in just to ream that out a little bit further, and that will give us the final result. And then we just did that for 20 more times on those particular guns for practice. And that pretty much finishes off the model, and then it's ready obviously for basing and painting, and we will get to that. So that was my efforts of trying to get through the construction of a Necron. I've never done anything from Warhammer before, so this was a good start. Pretty happy with the end result, and looking forward to doing some of the Space Marines. So again, thank you for coming along on this little journey. I know it's a bit like teaching someone how to suck eggs. You've all done this before, you know how it works. But for me, it's all new, and clearly this is sort of aimed at those that haven't done this before, to try and give them a bit of a leg up and a bit of an understanding of what they're up for, and maybe give a little bit of advice based on a first timer trying it rather than someone with years of experience. So again, thanks very much, and look forward to the next one. Cheers.